Listen here, we all know that corporate America can suck some real booty hole. But is it capitalism? Is it this, that, or the other? The answer is probably a lot more complicated, but I think no. For those of you that have been fortunate enough to work for a boss, work for a manager, that's a great leader. Work can be amazing. It can be fun, fulfilling. You go home energized. You're excited to go into work. But I'd venture to say that is pretty rare. My guest today, Kyle McDowell. He has led teams of every freaking size. He has worked for Fortune 100 companies, leading thousands and thousands and thousands of people. He's made every mistake under the sun. And if you want to learn from someone that's made every mistake and rectified as many as possibly can, he's written a book about it. It's called Begin with We, 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. We have a fun conversation today. We talk about why people are exhausted at work. We talk about what can be done about it, how to be a better leader. And if you're not a leader, how can you still effect change? How can you be authentic at work? How can you not be fearful? How can you stop just going through the motions? We talk about it all. Enjoy the conversation. Stay tuned to the end. He drops some real nuggets of wisdom. One of the recurring thoughts that I had among the stories you share, the examples, and just from my own personal experience, a phrase that really helped me actually shift my view of the world is do not blame to malevolence what can be explained with incompetence. It's one of those phrases that really helped me actually see the world way more positively. Like I'd rather see people as being stupid than being evil. And from the stories in the stories in your book, there are, and I'm sure you've got countless others, so many stories where leaders in corporations think they're doing the right thing. Yeah. Think they're empowering, but in reality, there was one specific example with a COO. I can't remember the exact. He responded to a marketing executive, if you saw my calendar and how busy I am, I really don't have time to look at this material. Yeah. Can you figure it out on your own? Right? He thought he was empowering, but he wasn't. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that phrase? Do you think it applies? Do you think it applies everywhere? Tell me what comes up when you hear that.
Yeah. So there are exceptions to every rule. But I think the exception makes the rule. And I'm with you, brother. I think for the most part, we all get up in the morning or evening, depending on what your schedule is, and we want to make an impact. We want to add value. We want to find fulfillment. But for any number of reasons, all of those wants, they become secondary and almost, in some cases, completely forgotten throughout our adult journey, our career journey, however you want to frame it. And what I have found, and it kind of drove me to document these principles and ultimately write my book, is, when you take a new job, we have skills training. The company teaches you how to do the job, the nuts and bolts required to deliver on that job. And occasionally you get some up training or refresher training or cross training. But what most companies don't do is they don't conspicuously set and deliver a series of thoughts, or in my case, principles that are kind of similar to the training. So we could tell you how to do your job, but we don't really do a very good job of telling people how to behave and interact with others. And there's certainly no fortified blueprint for leaders. And I found, if you leave people to their own devices inside of corporate America, all this noise enters our brain. Like, do I sound smart? Is my vocabulary where it needs to be? Am I dressed appropriately for this scenario? Do I look the part? Do I act the part? And all this noise takes off in our head. And I think that filters our ability to be our best selves. And when we're not our best selves, we care less about the job that we're in. We care less about the results that we deliver. We lose those wants that I mentioned a moment ago. And for me, being really explicit on my expectations of my teams, and by the way, being just as explicit that they should have those exact same expectations of me, or I'm a hypocrite, was a real pivotal moment in my career when I said, guys, this is who we are. And I expect everyone to behave this way. And I'm comfortable being really direct in that because you should hold me accountable. And I would tell my teams, grab me by the ear, call me out if I'm not living these principles. So your scenario or the example you give is a good one. And for your audience, I'll quickly share it. So this is a true story. A coaching client of mine named Brian was walking through a scenario where he had I forget her title, but someone in his organization came to him and said, "Hey, Brian, I really need your help looking over this marketing plan for one of the mobile home parks that they had run." And you're right. You nailed it. Great observation. Brian's response was, "Gosh, if you could see how busy I am, take a look at my calendar. You would know that I don't have time to help you or make this decision for you. I trust you. You're empowered to make those decisions." She walked away deflated. He walked, and he thought that he gave her an empowering kind of rah-rah. And so he's telling me about it, and he couldn't believe that she took it the way that she did. And I said, "Bud, you missed the boat. You missed the opportunity. You wanted to empower her, and you wanted her to feel like she had the ability and she's enabled to make these decisions, and then come to you if things don't go well. But you just told her you're too important to even have the conversation." So there again, man, without guideposts or guide rails or some type of blueprint for how we're supposed to behave and interact with one another behind the curtains at an organization. Without that, we're missed expectations. You heard one thing, I said something different. That's everywhere. And the bigger the organization, the more ripe we are, the more ripe the opportunity for big time disconnects, which is what drives really bad employee engagement, not to mention customer satisfaction as well. So I'm with you. Is a short way of answering your question.
Always love to hear that, you know?
Yes,
A quote from your book: "When people are more concerned about preventing reputational harm than they are focused on generating game-changing ideas, the outcome is mediocrity and stifled innovation." Why are people so scared? Why are we so scared at work, right? You know, logically, it's just a job. We can get another job. Why is this such a fearful, it feels life or death. When you think you're going to lose your job, it's life or death, man.
Yeah.
You know, I've certainly been there, having anxiety attacks, panic attacks, because I think I might lose my job. Why is it so deeply fearful for us to the point that we're mediocre and we stifle our own innovation?
You said it, and thank you for the quote. I actually, I remember saying that. I don't remember at what point of the book I said that, but the spirit of that comment or that quote is, and we've all seen it, Andrew. I'm sure you've seen it as well, right? When you raise your hand to take on more, or you raise your hand for a suggestion, you open yourself to criticism. You open yourself to more work. Right? No good deed goes unpunished. So when I raise my hand and say, "Hey, boss, I found something I think will make us really great," a couple of things almost always happen. One is, "Hey, thanks for that recommendation, Kyle. You now have more work." Well, that's not a big incentive for me to point out areas of opportunity. And then the other thing, which almost always happens, is, "Okay, Kyle, we need you to run with that. Good idea. Let's see how that goes." And then when I stumble, because it's new, and I've never done this before, but it's an observation, I feel like we could be better. I'm trying to be innovative. I'm trying to be provocative. I want us to be excellent. And with all of those things in mind, this is a new opportunity that's been addressed, has gone unaddressed, I should say. It's almost a given that there will be missteps. There will be mistakes. So not only do I get more work, and if I don't nail it, I'm going to be criticized, or I'm going to get slapped over the wrist, or God forbid, make a mistake and ultimately pay the ultimate price and lose my job. So I think inevitably what happens is you get members of the team or members of the organization more broadly that, what's the upside? Why do I raise my hand? Why do I want to take on more if I'm going to be criticized if it doesn't go perfectly? And oh, by the way, I'm just going to get more work because I recognize this opportunity. So then what happens is we have a bunch of really smart people with diverse perspectives that at one point cared a whole hell of a lot about their jobs. They become apathetic. They don't want to talk about new opportunities. They don't want to talk about making our team excellent. Why would they? Because we have told them, get in line, speak when spoken to. Your ideas are great. Just don't share them with anybody else because we've got our engine humming, which I think is a recipe for, as I said in the book, mediocrity. I want my teams to say, "Hey, Kyle, we got an opportunity over here. I may not be able to get to that with my current workload, but I just want you to know this is something that we could be better at. And then it's the boss's opportunity or idea. It's on that boss or that leader at that point to design the plan to address what's been uncovered or identified. Because my own career journey, I found apathy around year 20, 22 of my career. I was like, what am I doing this? I have the fancy titles, making good money, big fancy corner office, 15,000 employees, but I was totally unfulfilled. And it's like, why bother? And that's when I made the shift, Andrew. When I made a shift that was really conspicuous and took me from focusing almost exclusively on results, bang my fist on the desk at all costs, we're going to get these damn results, to investing all that same level of energy into the people that deliver the results. Wow, what a transformation for me personally. And then professionally, things really fell into place in a way that I had not expected.
It's almost like, this is a useful, evolutionary advantage that humans can kind of project out, but it's almost like we're mapping the decision tree of possible outcomes before we even bring, a potential issue to our boss. Cool. If they say no, I feel rejected. If they say yes, that splits the tree. Okay, I can either knock it out of the park and, well, that's good. But if I don't knock it out of the park, then there's these consequences. Yeah. But then you total up the outcomes along the bottom of that tree and you're like, man, there's only like 2 or 3 situations here, given the culture of the company I'm at, where I actually win. And then there's 12 possible outcomes where this doesn't really turn out all that great for me.
Why bother?
So I'm just not going to do anything at all.
Yeah. Why bother? Why bother? Why put yourself out there? Why put yourself out there? And I don't blame people and I don't blame members of teams for feeling that way. Because if your boss or leader hasn't gone out of his or her way to say things like, we take action, it's one of my principles. We own our mistakes is another. We pick each other up, right? If we're not conspicuous to say how we're going to behave in any given scenario, then we've left a whole blue sky of reactions at our disposal. And by that, I mean, I think it's incumbent upon the leader to create an environment where the team wants to be excellent. They want to be better than they were yesterday. How do you do that? You empower them. You enable them. You pay them a fair salary. You make them feel part of something bigger than themselves. And without leadership, that doesn't happen. Leaders are all in the people business. They're not in the nuts and bolts, execution business, although in some areas, obviously, that's much more of a requirement than others. But at the end of the day, the leader's job is to remove the barriers that stand in the way of the team being excellent. And step 2 is to continue to inspire them to deliver excellence in spite of the things we can't deliver, because we can't get all the noise out of the system. It's just not possible. And that's where the leader's job really takes utmost importance, and that's making sure the team feels empowered and part of something bigger. Especially
in your we number 2, which is we lead by example. You talk a lot about authenticity and bringing authenticity to the workplace. You swear in the book, you swear in real life. You talk about being authentically you. As I contemplated, how do I bring my authenticity? I think I'm okay at it, but I've definitely felt that authenticity in the workplace is kind of like your prisoner's dilemma. As so many of examples in your book, I feel like can go. We can either choose to, according to the prisoner's dilemma game, we can collaborate. We can both choose to be authentic and true to ourselves and work together. But if only one of you chooses to collaborate and the other chooses to defect, aka if one of you chooses to be authentic, but then the other one of you chooses the path of fear and inauthenticity and just kind of humdrum going through the motions, then really the person who's out there, the tallest nail gets struck down first, right? The tallest poppy gets cut down first. And so how do you think we come together as team members, as an org, that we both choose the collaboration in the prisoner's dilemma? How do you get others to also choose their authenticity, so that, obviously you're not the only one, because you kind of need everyone bought in on this idea, I think.
Yeah. And I love, no one's ever framed, so I get a variation of that question a lot, but I love the way you framed it with the prisoner's dilemma. I'm going to use that, actually. Dude, and I faced this myself. So for some context for your audience, in 2016 or so, I just left an organization where I had a few thousand employees. It was a Fortune 10 company, and I had hit. I mean, rock bottom's too dramatic. That's not the case. I had hit rock bottom in terms of my lust and desire to be somebody inside of corporate America. From the time I was 17, it was my goal to be a COO, CEO, running a big organization with with big money and titles and lots of people and all those things. And by most accounts, by pretty much any account, I had a wildly successful run in corporate America. But I told myself, I'm done, man. I was my health was not great. It cost me a marriage. I went through a divorce that I think was largely driven by my work-life balance. And I told myself if I was ever given an opportunity to lead an organization in a way that I had never been led personally, to be the leader that I never had, crush what I have since coined the leadership gap. And the leadership gap in my context is, Andrew, you and we're going to behave the same. If I'm your leader or you're my leader, the rules are the same, right? If I expect you to be on a Saturday, you'll see me on a Saturday. Those types of things. Well, in a kind of be careful what you wish for moment, I was given a role to lead about 15,000 really talented and passionate men and women that ran the Affordable Care Act enrollment centers as well as 1-800 Medicare enrollment centers. And I had told, when I took the role, I was told that there were some cultural opportunities. I think dysfunction and toxic are probably too strong of words, but
what a way to phrase that.
Yeah, there were
opportunities.
Yeah, there were opportunities. So, and the fellow that hired me was pretty direct. He said, that person needs to go. That person probably needs to go. This person's been here too long. You might want to. So coming in, I had all this noise and suggestions of how to handle it. And the night before I was going to meet with the top 40 or 50 people of this organization, I was in my hotel room in Lawrence, Kansas, my laptop in my lap. I still had the suit on from that day. And I was terrified, dude. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew it had to be compelling and it had to address exactly what you just said. If I'm going to come in and be this new guy and I'm going to I care about you more than about me and I care about us more than about me, there's only one way to prove that. And that's to lead by example every single day. So I stepped out the next morning after spending about 2 hours the evening before, and I created these 10 sentences. Each of them started with the word we. There was no pre-planning. There was no muse on my shoulder. And I had the 10 we's. I'm not super creative. So I had 10 sentences. Each started with we. I got the 10 we's. The next morning when I shared these principles, I said, folks, these are the rules that govern first, how we treat each other. These are how we will treat each other. And then second, these are the rules that govern how we treat those we serve externally, our clients, right? And dude, I can tell you, of those 40 or 50 people, half the people in the room were on board. They were fist pumping. I would say a quarter of the group was, okay, trust but validate, we'll see. And another quarter of the group was, this guy's full of shit. He's just another guy in a fancy suit and shiny shoes with his fancy MBA coming in here telling us what he's going to do for us. But we've seen this before. By the way, the fellow before me had been terminated. I think the woman before him had even been let go. It was it's a tough role. And immediately after that session, I was greeted with a bunch of people who were so eager for the road ahead. And then there were people that were not so eager, and they showed it. They were obstinate in many ways. They wouldn't answer my emails. They were just being difficult for the sake of being difficult. Lucky for me, and this is probably one of the only times in my career that I can point to this, because it's, it sounds arrogant, but it's not something that I did all the time. I was aware enough to know if I snap or if I bang my fist on the desk or if I behave any way contrary to any one of those principles, leading by example, I was DOA. The whole thing was a fraud and a house of cards, and I am just like the guy that they had before me and just like the guy that they're going to have after me. So it was really, really important for me at every crossroad, every time someone was difficult with me, every time someone challenged these principles and challenged if I was as legitimate or as authentic as I claimed to be, I had to bite my tongue. I didn't turn my cheek. That's different. I had to bite my tongue and not react the way that I would have reacted in the previous 20 plus years of my career, which was, I have a big title. I'm your boss. This is how it is. I couldn't do that. It worked for me in the past, but turns out parenthetically, I alienated a bunch of people, and probably, they reacted to me out of fear instead of respect and authenticity. So through all this process, man, long-winded way of saying, you to avoid that prisoner's dilemma as the leader of the organization or of a team. By the way, it could be a team of one, it could be a team of 15,000. What matters most is you living what you say. That's another one of my we's, is we say what we're going to do and then we do it. So I think if you put these little breadcrumbs along the way and give the team an opportunity to see you are living your word and your authenticity is legitimate, they can't help but notice it. That doesn't mean they're going to like everything you say. That doesn't mean they're going to agree with everything you say. But what it does mean is they know how you stand or where you stand, and you're consistent on the issues. Dude, at the end of the day, for me, it boils down to this: authenticity plus relatability equals trust. So if members on my team see that I'm authentic and they can relate to me, yeah, I got a sick kid at home, or yeah, man, I'm worried about this financial pressure we're getting from the CEO. Like, relatable. I know what you're going through. I've been in those shoes. I started my career in a cubicle much smaller than the one that you're probably in, folks on my team. So when you can establish that you're being authentic and there is some form of relatability, trust almost naturally always ensues. And I am a product of that. I think, I always say you may not like what I have to say, but you'll know it is authentically what I think, and I'm being open and honest with you. So you nailed it. I think it's a wonderful question. And it's, look, by the way, we're always leading by example. The question is, are we leading by an example that we're proud to see replicated? That's the real question.
Human beings are products of evolution, right? We're completely wired to survive. We're completely wired to go forward. Everything we do, from the negative of feelings, stress, anxiety, all these things that are designed to keep us alive. I'm really anxious to hear your take. There has to be. We all know that a great leader is better than a bad one. We all know what a great culture looks like. I hope so. I hope that people at least have an idea of the ideal culture, how they can feel at work. But most people don't. With every movement in culture, there's a counter movement. For years, it's been very much the hustle grind set, the hustle mindset. And now there's kind of this counter culture of no work, of refusing to work. Yeah. So I think people do have an idea of what work could be, but for work to be as unsatisfying as most people find it, there has to be someone winning on the way that things are normally done, right? In my mind, there has to be someone in this chain, in even regular workers, there has to be a way that we're benefiting psychologically to allow things to continue as they are. Someone has to be winning with a bad leadership. Who do you think's winning? Like, why does it persist? Why don't we say, oh man, this bad leadership is so painful, I'm going to change the way I lead? Why doesn't that happen more than it does, you think?
There is safety in silence. There is a degree of, why rock the boat? My paycheck is guaranteed. Not quite guaranteed, but my paycheck is still going to come. It's still going to come. Why would I give an inch or an ounce more of effort because my paycheck was going to be the same, unless I'm in a sales environment where I'm commissioned, those types of things. So I think the premise of your question is a really fascinating one, and depending on who you ask, some would say they've never seen a great culture. Some would say they've only seen the shitty, toxic side that I was unfortunate enough to see in spades before I made the change. But here's the thing, dude. The culture of an organization, and then byproducts of that culture within teams of an organization, are almost always established by the leader of the team or the leader of the organization or both. And it can go either or any number of directions. I think about it this way, and I think this is probably a real strong indicator of why people feel the way they do about their jobs. When we promote someone, or when someone goes into a position of leadership where they have direct reports, 1, 2, 10, whatever, almost always they've gotten that role because they've shown a proficiency at the role that they're in. There's a team of 10, they excel, they're the number one deliverer, producer, whatever the right word is, out of that team of 10. So the higher ups say, well, surely this person's got to be great at leading this team. Nothing could be further from
they can replicate themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens is the person, so let's say you and I are on a team, right, Andrew, and our boss has moved on to greener pastures. Now there's this opening. You outperform me. You're the top performer of our team of 10. Our boss's boss says, Andrew is obviously the person for this role. Just because Andrew has delivered the nuts and bolts, X's and O's at his role does not mean he knows shit about leading people. It does not mean that he's going to be great at inspiring people or working with them or finding common ground with them, right? But what happens is Andrew takes the job and he, used the word, replicates the behavior that he sees out of the boss that has left, as well as the person that ultimately hired him, because there's a natural indebtedness to them. You feel as if, wow, I need to behave similar to this guy or gal because they're obviously doing pretty well. They're 2 levels above. They're doing something right. So and by the way, I don't even think this is intentional. I think it's observed behavior, and we think this is how the workplace is supposed to be. You monkey see, monkey do. You see a bad leader. You don't think, oh, I'm going to be a bad leader. You think, well, this is how it goes. This is how it's done. So we put you in a position that you're not qualified for. Yes, you know the X's and O's of the role, but you probably need some leadership development. You probably need some leadership coaching. You probably need a mentor, whatever works for you. So that's A. And then B is we expect that person who is now in this newly found position of leadership to be different than the person that hired them. It's not going to happen. So the cycle repeats, and it will continue to repeat till the end of time until people say enough is enough. And I recognize that I can find the fulfillment that I once chased when I first entered the workforce if I just behave a little differently. And that means treat people better than I probably have in the past. That means putting my emphasis and energy into their success versus my own. Sounds so counterintuitive in today's world. I'm telling you, the more emphasis you place on the growth and development of others, the more the accolades and the success and the advancement comes your way. I promise you that. It's kind of counterintuitive because, as you mentioned, we were in this era of the hustle mindset. That's how I grew up. Work was my identity, and not so more. Not anymore. Not any longer. That paradigm has changed. So I think it has to start with the leader in any organization. And by the way, it doesn't matter if I'm flipping burgers. It doesn't matter if I'm in a production facility. It does not matter. I'm not naive. We're not going to spring out of bed every morning and sprint to work with unicorns and rainbows. I'm not naive to that. However, if we're going to spend over 100,000 hours of our life doing this thing called work, we should really try to make it the best scenario it can be. Doesn't mean you're going to love it. Doesn't mean you're going to love everyone around you, but you do deserve to find fulfillment. You do deserve an opportunity to make an impact. And if you find yourself in an organization that you cannot do either of those things, you should question if you're in the right spot, because someone somewhere will value your input.
Are you familiar with the region beta paradox?
No, hit me.
Okay, so you're going to love this. So the region beta paradox is this psychological paradox. Let's say you live in an apartment. You rent, apartment's a little bit old, plumbing's a little bit old, and there's a little bit of mold on the ceiling, but you live in a nice part of town, rent's cheap, it's okay. Now let's say there's a ton of mold in the apartment.
Okay.
In the first scenario, you're probably you'll stick around. It's okay. What's a little bit of mold? Well, we know that that's really bad for you long term. So paradoxically, if your apartment was sprawling in mold, it would be a negative enough scenario, situation that would spur you into action to move, to relocate, to get out of that environment. So paradoxically, a ton of mold in your apartment is actually better for you long term than just a little bit, because that just a little bit you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay living with.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we know now in the literature, even a little bit's really bad for you. So, but paradoxically, it'd be better for you if the entire bathroom wall was covered in mold than just a little bit along the corner in the ceiling. It's okay. Yeah.
Wow.
Right. And so I have found, I've been in work situations like this, and I'm sure there's so much truth here in just corporate America. Yeah. My boss is kind of a dick. Yep. But pays decent, and maybe in a few years I'll get promoted. If that boss was an utter asshole, it would spur you into action to find a better culture, to find a better position, to find something more aligned with what you want to work with. And so as you were talking, I thought about that psychological paradox. It would be better for you if your boss was an absolute dick than just he doesn't really pay attention to us, and doesn't really really help out at all, but at least not an asshole. I can almost see a chart, right? That the paradox gets stronger with compensation. I could almost there's like some tipping point that says where the money will allow you to look the other way to no end. Which is also, and by the way, I have to say, I in some ways I was that guy, and I don't expect anybody to feel any sympathy for me. Here's a guy complaining that he was, making a bunch of money but unhappy. Boo hoo. The downside of that I didn't realize is with each passing day of that apathy, with that apathy growing, your opportunity to make an impact and find fulfillment gets slimmer every single day. You stick in this environment that's making you miserable. And so I landed on a simple equation for me that I share with my executive coaching clients is it's our goal to imagine 3 circles, right? And we're going to have a Venn diagram of these 3 circles. There's one for impact, there's one for money, and there's one for makes me happy. I think it's really important, and it's our obligation as humans on this planet to find the best mix of those 3 elements that we can, because when you can make an impact and it makes you happy, the money matters a little bit less. I know that sounds maybe counterintuitive. Likewise, if you make a whole bunch of money and you're making a big impact, you're probably going to look aside and not be quite as happy. You'll settle for something less than ultimate happiness. It's our goal, my goal now, is to try to find that right balance, the right overlap of those 3 circles: impact, money, and makes me happy. Because you look, I'm not naive, dude. We've all had roles where we're not happy in. I've been there, was there for years at points in my career. But at the end of, sorry for the cliche, but at the end of the day, it's like nobody's coming to make you change jobs. Nobody's coming to find you a better boss. You can bitch about it, or you can do something about it. And that's what I like to encourage folks. Do something about it. If you don't like the environment and you feel like you can't, first of all, I think it's important to try to give your level best to change it. I think that's an obligation, but I'm not naive to say that even naive enough to say that there are organizations where the toxicity and the dysfunction runs so deep, you ain't changing it. I've been there. So get out of it is my suggestion in that scenario. There's a Japanese principle called ikigai that I think I can't remember the 4th principle, but you've got 3 of the 4. I think
really?
The 4th, yes. I think the 4th, you're an ancient Japanese philosopher. Didn't you know this, Kyle? Come on now. Let's go. So I think the 4 are, oh man, I'm going to butcher it. I think they actually might have impact split into 2 categories of what's personally impactful for you. And then the second area of impact is what's impactful for the overall community / world. So this is the principle of ikigai.
No idea.
Don't ask me to spell it. Okay. Yeah, don't ask me to spell it. You'll have to look it up.
I gave a talk to sorry, go ahead, please.
No, please go.
I gave a talk to 100 8th graders recently. And the speech I give to, so I have a talk that I give to big companies. I have a talk that I give to smaller companies. I have a talk that I give to conferences. They all kind of different variations of the same thing. But I haven't given a lot of talks to a group of eighth graders. So the night before I was going to meet with these eighth graders, I thought, man, if I was in eighth grade, what do I want to hear about the road ahead for my career? So there was no muse. I just thought, man, I want to find a job that makes me happy. Of course, I got to make money because I want to do things. I got to pay bills. I have obligations. I should probably think about fulfillment like this. So there was no, I wish I had read this and stolen it from somebody, but that's how I birthed those three adjectives for our careers. I
mean, that's the Feynman technique, at its finest, right? You understand a principle when you approach it with the mindset of, I'm going to teach this to someone. I think even better when it's, hey, eighth grade level. Oh yeah. You had mentioned, obviously really reached a pinnacle of corporate success in your career. And at one point that was a real identity for you. Yeah. Do you feel, would you take that back? You had mentioned that now your identity is less tied in your corporate success, so to speak. Would you take back those years? Because I think some people might look at that, some of the insecurities I have, part of me doesn't want to let go because they fuel me, because they motivate me. And so do you regret your time where part of your identity was so corporate, success oriented?
Dude,
would you take that back?
What a great question. I've never, ever been asked that. I'm a little flat-footed. I wouldn't take it back. I wouldn't take it back because I don't, like I said earlier, there are exceptions to the rule, but I think the journey that all of us are on, we're going to do things and make decisions and behave in ways that we look back and say, not sure if that was the right path, or I'm not sure if that was the right behavior. But I also am hopefully self-aware enough to recognize that behavior and the way I did identify myself with my work, if I had not taken it, it's like this, man. If I didn't behave that way and associate so strongly my identity with my job, which in hindsight was a mistake, I would not have gotten those big leadership opportunities that I had. I would not have had the opportunities to work under really shitty bosses that showed me there's a better way. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to take on the role that I mentioned in 2017, where I created the principles that wrote the book. But here's as I think through the answer, here's where I think it ultimately comes for me. So before I left corporate America in 2019, I was at an organization. It was a Fortune 8 company. I had a $2 billion budget. I had 15,000 employees, 40-something locations. I ran the world's largest mail-order pharmacy as one part of 7 different functions that I was responsible for overseeing. We sent 53 million prescriptions a year. That's 1/7 of my overall scope of responsibilities. I'm leaving this company nameless intentionally. The most toxic environment I'd ever been a part of, the most soul-sucking, like, you people are not human type environment that I'd ever been a part of. Long story short, I was there a little over a year. I realized it wasn't for me. And I think my work showed it. They weren't thrilled with what I was doing because my approach was a little bit granola and rainbows and unicorns for them because it's a dog-eat-dog company.
Yeah.
And
I love it.
Right. So I left and, I was fortunate enough to leave with a little bit of a cushion and a runway and a non-compete, candidly, that forced me to sit on the sidelines for a minute. And if I had not had that experience, I never would have written the book. Wouldn't be talking to you now. Wouldn't have written a bestseller. Would not have, been on a tour to promote this thing for the last little over a year. So I think everything happens for a reason. But do I regret it? No. Would I approach it differently? Yes. Maybe that's the cop-out answer. And I think, for those that aren't aware, the context here, I've been open in admitting that, my work consumed me in a way that led to some bad behavior on my part. It led to some life changes, the divorce, among a few other things that I talked about, my health. Those can all be looked at as, mistakes or missteps or anything less than ideal scenarios, but they also put me in the position that I'm in today. And I think that's just part of being human. The last thing I would say to this, man, is, and this sounds so counterintuitive, and if I were listening to this or watching this podcast as my younger self, I would turn it off because I would say the guy's full of shit. But here's the truth. The more disconnected you can be from your job, the more successful you can be, because when we're so connected and it is our identity, we lose all of our objectivity. We start to make decisions that are more focused on my own success and my own livelihood than what's right. So the results start to wane. Not only do they wane, but you just do it and you deliver in a way that is not as fulfilling. And I just want people to realize that you don't have to be, your career is not your identity and your identity is not your career. And I didn't learn this until I left that organization I just mentioned, and I started thinking about and talking about writing a book. And friends of mine, I didn't talk about the book to many people, but when I did start to share it, they were like, dude, I had no idea you cared so much about culture. I had no idea you cared so much about leadership. Why? Because I was so consumed in that corporate world of getting shit done and being results at all costs. I never talked about those things with friends and family. And so that was an epiphany for me. And the more clearly you're able to see what's right in front of you, obviously the better your results are going to be. And that only comes with being able to disconnect emotionally in some ways from what you're doing. And I'll say one last thing, brother. When I left that organization, it took me months to put this down. It took me months to not be glued, even though I had no emails coming because I had no job. It took me months to not go check email. And I called it detox. I had to detox from that environment because it was everything that I rail against now. So we've come full circle, and that is a very long-winded way of saying I wouldn't change it. Not happy about it, but I think out of that scenario, in those instances, that put me in the seat that I'm in today, chatting with you.
And any road that doesn't lead to the Holiness Podcast is a road you don't want to take, Kyle.
Right. Come on, man. Right?
Um,
My new friend, right?
Yeah, come on. One of the things I have found for me that ability to detach from the outcomes of a thing is so difficult. Even in like preparing for a podcast, I can't help but think of metrics. Like, oh, is this going to give me X subscribers? This and I was recently reading a book called called Feel Good Productivity, written by Ali Abdaal. He's a productivity YouTuber. He was a doctor at Oxford, Harvard, one of the two. I think it was Oxford. Got his doctorate from Oxford, and huge YouTube channel now, 5 million plus. But in the book, he talks about approaching things as play. How can you approach this thing with play and have fun doing it? And as I feel like as I've learned to, as I'm trying to apply that, well, could I just have fun doing this thing? Things have become way easier. But I think, and this leads me to my question. Public data about people's financial well-being seems to be continuing to decline. I think more people are living paycheck to paycheck than they ever have. Financial literacy is almost at its lowest. I think the average American has less than $1,000 in their savings account. The average, right? Yeah. So I can't help but wonder, do you think that some of this play it safe, don't step out, it is in some ways tied to that the average financial situation, literacy that most employees most likely find themselves?
Boy, that's
like,
a good
shit,
question.
if I lose this job, I've got a week and a half of expenses, and then I'm out.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's less so than maybe pre-pandemic because, and I see this in some of the companies I work with, they're having a hard time attracting great candidates and keeping good employees, not because they have a shitty culture or they've got bad leadership, although I'm sure that is the case in some scenarios. I think it's because the workforce has more options than ever before. You can work in another hemisphere. That was not the case just a handful of years ago. Sure, it was in pockets. You could see real remote work, but it was not. Look, I got on a plane every single week for almost 12 years. That's unheard of today, unless, it's an absolute requirement of the job. So I think the short answer is yes. I think you're right, but I think it's less so now because the opportunities are so plentiful now, which, by the way, is not unrelated to some of the turnover problems that companies see. Okay, the workforce just sees work differently since the pandemic. I think all of us do in some way. And the job that is a pain in my ass, a boss that is not really in it for the right reasons, could care less about me, spends most of their time trying to play gotcha instead of actually helping me be better. I'm not going to stick around for that because I know there's an opportunity down the street or across the country or around the world. I just got to get on the internet and find it. I mean, the proliferation of social media, of AI, among other things, is completely changing the landscape for the workforce, for all of us. But what is really troubling to me is that leaders are not keeping up with that pace of change. They still want to rule with an iron fist by intimidation as if they're the only shop in town. And those are the organizations I think are going to have a hard time in the future because the workforce views their role, views the role they play in the organization, and views their loyalty to the organization very differently than your parents did, my parents did, our grandparents. And even just a few years ago, people viewed it differently. So that's part of my message now is, you can be very successful with an old school leadership playbook. You certainly can. It's not sustainable. You will have turnover. You will have disenfranchised and apathetic employees. And ultimately, your customers feel that and your business will struggle. If you go into these or approach your team or teams with the mindset that, yeah, things are different. I have to lead a little bit differently. And that might mean I have to treat Andrew a little bit differently than I treat Lisa because they're different people and different things motivate them and different things are required to inspire them. Then that's what I have to do. Years ago, when my folks came up, my parents came up, the boss just had to say, because I said so. In those days, I just don't think that's the way to get things done any longer.
What's your hot take on what the state of work, the state of employment looks like in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think, a lot of gurus in the space will say, well, we're in a period of transition. We're in it's a lot of uncertainty after the pandemic. I think that's always the case. I think we're always in a period of transition. Think about when, any number of examples throughout the Industrial Revolution, throughout the course of history, new technology comes in, jobs are eliminated, but new jobs are created. I think we're going to continue to see that, maybe exponentially more so than we ever have in the past. But there is one constant theme, regardless of how deep an organization or an industry goes in things like AI or technology or automation, there still is a requirement for that human connection that requires leaders to be empathetic. It requires leaders to exhibit traits and skills that still inspire their teams to be great. That will never go away. Never go away. So when I'm asked that question, which is a question I get a lot, I think the next 5 years are as unpredictable as the previous 5 years. Hopefully there's no pandemic thrown in there or some global crisis. But I think the leader who is mired in ways of the past and doesn't recognize I've got to adapt and look, and it's no secret, right? With baby boomers aging out of the workforce, millennials coming into the workforce, Gen Xers getting up there as well. the intersection of these profiles of these generations is probably going to come to a really loud bang, if you will. And I think we're starting to see that now with turnover in some industries. We're starting to see that now with the length of time positions are staying open. We're starting to see that in employee engagement and employee satisfaction surveys across multiple industries, which I think is really, really damning in some ways. But I also think it inspires me in some ways, that because I've seen a better way, and I've seen companies and I've seen people become really connected to one another in ways that transcends the workplace. I think I stay optimistic about that, because I truly believe if we invest the same level of energy in helping one another, focusing on the we more so than I and me and you, but the we, I think we are much better positioned for success. I just think the emphasis should be much more on those things than they have been in the past, and they're going to be a requirement more so than they have in the past, because the options are unlimited for the workforce.
Do you think a universal basic income solves any of these leadership problems at all?
Dude, you're taking me down there, huh?
Maybe takes away from some of the fear, some of the inauthenticity. You can kind of risk being yourself a bit more. Do you think universal basic income would solve any of these leadership problems?
Yeah, the truth is, I'm not avoiding the question. The truth is, I don't know enough about the pros and cons to say yes or no. Sure. I will say there's a very strong argument that entitlements in general don't work. Now, I say that with full respect to a low-income family who has found a really bad scenario by nothing of their own doing. They've got to get bills paid. They've got to keep kids fed. They've got to keep them clothed. And those entitlement programs are a godsend and a lifesaver for them. Those scenarios exist. But I have no data to back this up, but I happen to think for every one of those, there's at least one, if not more, of someone taking advantage of that entitlement. And I think, and this gets into like a political kind of arena, but I don't think that's appropriate, because at the end of the day, we're all humans regardless of our political affiliation. But I do feel
100%,
dude, and maybe it's just my upbringing. I was taught from a very early age. I came from middle class at best, but I was taught from a very early age, if I want this, I have to work for that. If I want to go here, I've got to make the money to fund that. Dude, every year when new Air Jordans would come out, I wanted these shoes every single year.
Let's go mow some lawns.
Right. This is back in the late 80s, early 90s. And my folks, who some years couldn't afford those, they would put me to work. I knew I had to go mow lawns. I had to, whatever it was, I knew this would result in that. And I think with universal basic income, we lose some of that. I think we lose some of that. By the way, Andrew, I'm the first to admit I am super ignorant on the topic. I believe when something is given for, I'll take it from the other perspective. I believe very strongly that challenges make us better. I believe very strongly that everything in this life worth having is not easily obtained. Everything that we want, that we desire, must come at a price, whether it's monetary, whether it's effort, whether it's my time, whatever it is. Because if it's so easy to get great stuff, everyone would have it. I believe work and effort, however you define either of those words, are a prerequisite and a requirement for obtaining anything worth having. And when we just give those things away, we just raise the bar. I don't think people are still going to have wants and desires that the universal basic income won't accommodate. So that's it's a tough question to answer, but I do think it is. My gut tells me it's probably not the right thing.
And I know not nearly enough about it. Just fun question I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, I love the question.
Where can people get your book? Where can they look at your work, your YouTube, Instagram? We'll link it all below.
Yeah. So my website is KyleMcDowellInc.com. All social platforms are at Kyle McDowell Inc. The book, Begin With We, is a USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestseller, which is even mind-blowing to say out loud. And dude, I know at the end of every podcast, everybody asks that. I take pride in, probably more so than most, do my damnedest to reply to every single person that reaches out. Just 2 weeks ago, a woman messaged me through my website and told me, long email, was telling me about the success and the wins that her team had. She's in a part of a health system, a hospital system in Illinois. Dixie is her name. Shout out Dixie if you happen to be watching or listening. She shared with me that her team had overcome all kinds of odds. Internally, her team was known as the Black Hole because nobody knew what they did. People would go there and never be.
What a nickname! Oh,
right. Who wants to go work at the Black Hole, right? No. And then she talked about her leader, Jim, who is the reason why they have kind of turned that ship around. The Black Hole is not nearly as prevalent or as mentioned as often as it used to be. But she said she could tell that his leadership tank was starting to kind of run on E. And she asked, would I send him a book? Actually, no, that's not true. She asked, would I write him a letter? Just as a shot in the arm to kind of year end, to kind of get his mojo back. And I said, I'd love to. I sent him a book. I wrote a nice note inside of it and, mentioned how much his team cares about him and all that. And I share all of that because, it's one thing to say, here's my social media, go follow me. Use it. My social media is there. I like to use the word social in social media. So if any of your audience is struggling, looking for advice, want to find a better path to fulfillment and impact and happiness, I would like to help. This is part 2 of my career journey. I left corporate America in 2019, and it is now my mission and my purpose to rid the world of the toxic ways and the dysfunction we've all seen so often, too many times in corporate America. And I think it happens with one person at a time. And I want to do my part to help that happen.
Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate you, man. And we're back. Yeah. Tell me about that. Like they impacted your personal life then.
Yes. And that was a really unintended, yet beautiful byproduct that happened to me. And I've heard from countless strangers through social media that they have experienced the same thing. And that was embracing the 10 W's in our work life, but then kind of feeling like a hypocrite that I wasn't living those same principles outside of my work life. So the unintended byproduct was, okay, if you're this guy that prides himself on authenticity, and here's how you behave when you're on stage in the work world, but you go home and you don't live those same, you're a fraud. And I've come to hate the word hypocrite more than just about any other word in the English language because I think it's the opposite of authenticity. So now a really silly example, and I've mentioned this on other shows before, and I've gotten some jokes about it, but it's true. Number one, the first we is we do the right thing always, right? One day I'm at the grocery store and I leave the grocery store. I've got my grocery carts, my cart out in the parking lot. I fill up the truck. I go to take off and I left the grocery cart sitting in the parking spot and I'll see it in my rearview mirror and I go, what an asshole. What a hypocrite. That's not doing the right thing. It's not. You will never, ever, ever see me leave a grocery cart in a parking lot because I know better. And it was that simple. That moment had such an impact on me. It's like you cannot be one person during the work day and work hours and be something different. So that's a byproduct I never anticipated. And, I would leave that with you, brother. If allow me one other quick story. A guy that I used to work with at the organization when I rolled out the 10 W's shared a beautiful story with me about a month after the 10 W's were rolled out, a month or so. We had gotten these 10 Wee coffee mugs, had the 10 W's on one side, our company logo on the other. And he had gotten into the habit of eating his morning cereal with his toddler out of these coffee mugs. And one day the toddler dropped his coffee mug, cereal goes everywhere. The dad, who was about to just kind of freak out, looks over at his son. His son says, "That's okay, Daddy. We own our mistakes, right?" That's we number, 5? We own our mistakes. Kid picked up the cereal, moved on, right? So if anything, if you hear nothing from me today, I would encourage you and others not only to live the principles in our work life, because I do think it provides a level of clarity that is absent in a lot of organizations, but they also serve as beautiful guideposts for who we are outside of the workplace. Try to embrace them and live them outside of work as well.